In Chapter 10, we're going to discuss the final portion, I guess, of the applications phase of this course, and we're going to look at corporate project analysis. We want to determine how you figure out whether a project or a company that you want to buy or a new product line, is it economically feasible to do this plan or to do the project. So capital budgeting is the process to evaluate these long-term investments, and as always, the goal of maximizing owner wealth is a critical component. So there are two kinds of expenditures in a business. There are those expenditures that are operating expenditures. That's just day-to-day kinds of business. It happens within a year. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about projects that have a lifespan of greater than 1 year. So the process, and most larger companies follow this process through a committee structure. So we're going to come up with a proposal, right? We're going to decide or present our projects that we want to this committee. That committee is going to review and analyze the data. They're going to make some decisions on those things that are good and those things that they decide to reject. We'll start the process of implementing the projects that are accepted by the company. And then, of course, from time to time, certainly at least annually, we will monitor and follow up on the projects to make sure they're working the way we wanted them to work. Projects can be segmented into two basic types: independent projects and mutually exclusive projects. And the idea with mutually exclusive is that when you select one project, it has an impact on others. In this case, what we're talking about, if you say Project A is better than B, you would select A and naturally then reject Project B. Independent projects are not related to each other. You could do, if there were 4 independent projects, you could do all 4. You could do 1 and 3. You could do none of them. But they're not related to, in other words, the other kinds of projects. And this is essentially the way business works. If you think about a company that wants to buy a piece of equipment, say we want to buy a new pizza oven for a pizza shop, we're not going to go and just go to one store and find out what they have and take that one particular pizza oven. We're going to explore. We're going to come up with maybe 6 or 7 pieces of equipment that match our needs. And once we know what those are, we're going to have to figure out which one is the best. So the mutually exclusive projects implies they're going to have to rank projects from the very best to the worst. And of course, we only pick the best. So if you can imagine a company is deciding to buy pizza ovens, a refrigeration unit, a vehicle for business, etc. Maybe they've got 5 things they would like to buy. They're all mutually exclusive groups, independent, separately from each other. But once we have decided that these are the 5 best and one in each category, then all of those projects then become independent. We're going to be working under an assumption, at least initially, that the company has unlimited funds. That is, the company decides what are the good things that it wants to do, and then we're going to figure out how we pay for it. It's not until we figure out what the cost is at a certain funding level, as we did in Chapter 9. If we find out that we need to gather $5 million, we need to know what the cost is. What's the weighted average cost of capital, and we'll figure out which projects are acceptable. Now, in real life, that's not the way it works. In real life, management decides how much money they're going to spend. So we have to rank our projects from the very best to the very worst within the guidelines of this limited amount of financing that the management of the company is going to give to the divisions, if you will, to do their projects. Again, we've talked about this idea of a ranking approach and or an accept-reject approach. It really depends on what kinds of things you're talking about. A ranking approach implies mutually exclusive project. Once we are down to the nitty-gritty, we have 5 things to pick from. We will analyze them independently and either accept or reject those projects. So we're going to look at these 2 projects. One project costs $42,000, the other costs $45,000, and we have the projected cash flows for the next 5 years. So we're going to go through the process here of looking at different techniques for analyzing this particular data. So the payback period is the first technique. Very simply, it is how long it takes for the company to recover its initial investment of the project. Each of these techniques has a decision rule, if you will. In this case, if the payback period is less than the maximum amount, we would accept it. If it's greater than the maximum amount, you would obviously reject it. The equal sign, if you notice there's no equal sign, the equal sign typically falls to the acceptance piece. So in this case, if you said if the payback period is less than or equal to the maximum, we would accept the project. That also would be, in real life, a viable project to do. So the capital budget techniques worksheet allows us to input the data. Don't forget that the initial investment is a cash outflow, negative $42,000, and then we have our data. So for the payback period for project A is 3 years, and we have a benchmark of 3 years. So project A is acceptable. Project B has a payback period of 2.4 years, and of course with 3 years the benchmark, it is also acceptable. So if these were independent projects, we'd do both of them. But if we had to pick the best, you would choose the one that had the shortest payback period, the one that gets your money back the quickest. The pros and cons of this are fairly simple, right? It is widely used. It's very simple. It looks at cash flows, and it is a simple risk measure. The challenges, though, are very big. In my mind, I think they probably outweigh the pros. The payback period is subjectively determined by management. How did they decide that they want the number to be 3? Is the number 3 for all projects, or do they have different numbers for different kinds of projects? So that subjectivity takes away some of the luster, if you will, of the ease and the simplicity of this technique. It doesn't address the idea of wealth maximization. So using the payback period all by itself does not guarantee that the stock price will rise. And finally, there is the idea here that it doesn't consider the time value of money. And if it's not considering the time value of money, that also implies that it doesn't affect or impact or is not impacted, by the risk of the project. So while it's easy to compute, the payback period just obviously has these drawbacks. So a question is, we haven't even talked about the net present value method yet, but when should you use net payback period and when should you use the net present value method? And again, we're going to talk about this as we get to the end of the chapter to discuss whether things are good projects or bad projects and which techniques are better to use. We have a small medical appliance manufacturer. They're looking at some mutually exclusive projects, gold and silver. You see that the costs are the same, but you also see that the cash flows are different. They're in different orders. They're in different magnitudes. Both of these have a payback period of 3 years. So the question is, which one of these is really the better project? Which one would you rather do? We have another company, 2 projects, both cost $10,000. Their cash flows again are different. The payback period for X is 2 years. The payback period for Y is 3 years. It would seem like Project X is a more desirable project when you think about the payback period. Of course, these are just showing us examples that we really need to understand. What does payback tell us? It's a simple tool, but it doesn't give us a complete answer on what we need to do for a project. The net present value technique is a much more sophisticated technique. It utilizes the time value of money. The R here, the rate of return that we want to discount this at, is the company's weighted average cost of capital. So the formula, it's the present value of the cash flows minus the initial investment. So if we kind of go through our formula here and do a little algebra, it says here, if the value of a project is greater than or equal to price, you would buy it. That's one of our initial investment rules. So if the value minus the price is greater than 0, again, just subtracting price from both sides, we have a buy proposition. So then value minus price is a definition or a formula for net present value. So if the net present value is greater than or equal to 0, you buy. Now when you take the quiz, the textbook doesn't use the equal sign with the choices. Greater than or 0 you do, less than 0 you don't do. So what do you do if it's equal? The textbook says you are indifferent. And in this case, since you're not increasing the value of the company, you probably should not do the project. At least that's the view of the textbook. Again, we have the numbers to calculate, right? If the net present value is greater than 0, you're going to get a return greater than the cost of capital. That should increase the market value of the firm and therefore the wealth of the owners of the firm. So net present value directly measures the change in wealth to shareholders. So here in this example, Project A, the net present value from Project A was $11,000, and the net present value of B is $10,000. So you should do both of these projects if they're independent. The question, though, is what if they're mutually exclusive? Although it is barely true, right? Project A has a higher net present value than B. So what that means is Project A will increase shareholder wealth more than Project B will. Now these numbers are very close, so we really maybe want to take another look. Maybe we'll do some other techniques to decide exactly where spending our money is most effective. And that's the first half of this capital budgeting chapter.